We live in a pattern that we have seen throughout time with regard to technologies is that humans are very crafty people. Like we find interesting solutions, but we often get out over our skis, right? We develop things that are of a larger scale than we really know how to handle. And what we have done in the past is when we see this happen, we take a step back and we find institutions and we find frameworks for doing these things in a safe way. Are walled off. They are very complicated. They're things that you need to be a specialist to really understand the consequences of. And the fact that we've been having the exact same kinds of false choices. Is it about censorship or safety? Like the fact that we're being asked these false choices is just an illustration of what happens when the real through legitimate channels like the SEC or Congress to make sure that the public has the information they need in order to have technologies be human-centric, not computer-centric.
Thank you.
Thank
you for an extraordinary testimony. You've done America a real public service, I think.
Thank you.
The record will remain open for for 2 weeks. Any senators who want to submit questions for the record should do so by October 4th. Adjourn.
Thank you.
You've been watching live pictures here on Capitol Hill, the whistleblower there for Facebook. She is a Facebook whistleblower. She released tens of thousands of pages of internal research and documents surrounding addiction, involving our kids and the multi-billion-dollar company. Francis, that Facebook researchers have repeatedly found that the photo-sharing platform is toxic for our teen girls. Facebook has aggressively pushed back against these reports. Let's bring back, once again, business correspondent Deidre Bolden, also SiriusXM radio host and Muse, and also Roger McNamara, Roger to Mark and Cheryl. Let's start with you. Pushing forward and looking at fixes and where do these that were mentioned in detail. Also, in particular, a reform of Section 230. In addition to possibly, and we heard this from Facebook and its actions, where should we begin? Because it gets pretty technical and in the weeds, but maybe you can make sense of it for us on what you think could begin.
So I work very closely with members of Congress on that are required here. We need to think about safety, privacy, and competition. And here's the way you have to think about it. Section 230 was originally created in 1996. Essentially allowing for the people who use internet platforms to put their own opinions up. Companies that were not held responsible for the content of phone calls because they couldn't control that. The problem is the courts have interpreted Section 230 to provide blanket immunity to internet platforms. It really began with a case related to Grindr, has basically been sanctioned as okay under Section 230, which is nuts. And so the notion that it must either be reformed or scrapped, I think, is well understood. But when we're thinking about safety, it's actually a much balanced capitalism, which is the business model that Frances Haugen was describing. And so that requires something that looks like an FDA that requires tech companies to prove that their products are safe before they're allowed to have them in the market. And I think they would have to continuously get this. See, it's very simple. Right now, there is literally no protection to the consumer. Every time you make a financial transaction, every time you get an app, anytime you go on the web, all of that data is tracked at your individual level. And it's available in a marketplace and sold to people who create these models. That is so blatantly unfair. And we need to basically have a ban on surveillance capitalism, which that's the very beginning. And then on competition, part of the problem we had yesterday, Facebook goes down, guys are monopolies. And so we need to do all three. And we need to do them more or less at the same time. Fortunately, there are different committees of Congress, so you can actually run these things at the same time. Moderately optimistic.
Oh, wow. We've got a positive. Okay, we got a little bit of a thumbs up here then from Roger. Let's hear feels with regard to if he were sitting before these lawmakers, what he would suggest and see as good reforms and moving in the right direction. I think about a regulatory body, but my goodness.
I know. I love it, Kira. I love the conversation between you and Roger and then tossing it to me because I love where it's going, where you and Roger just went regarding Section 230. Section 230 is one of the most common. It was just simplistically the 26 words that create the internet has divulged into this most complicated context of understanding. And then where do you apply Section 232 and then where you don't? So much of this conversation has been focused on platforms for the average American to also understand that Section 230 will also have impact on Yelp and TripAdvisor. And so what essentially it is saying is that food, I give it a negative rating and or a negative comment, then there is liability that I could sue protection of TripAdvisor and Yelp to be able to have the type of platform that allows those type of comments to go forward. I was talking with somebody last night because this is things I do is talk about Section 230 is the paper boy and the paper they're delivering is like the New York Times or the Washington Post, which is the Washington Post and the New York Times. And so I think it's important that we kind of teach the audience a little bit in most simplistic use cases of what Section 30 is. There's a lot of individuals, such as Roger said, is that people want regulation within Section 230. I believe even Mark Zuckerberg is interested in having that will create a certain limit of liability for these platforms, right? And as a carve out, what needs to be done is you need to have industry regulation that would then set the platforms of big tech companies are in violation of it, then they could be held liable. I think we're moving now in a direction where these companies in Section 230 was so protected, but I think Congress and elected officials to put more pressure on how can we modify and do carve-outs to Section 230, but that still allows the type of freedom of speech to exist and to move. I thought in the beginning, before she began her testimony this morning, we all thought it was going to be this very explosive burn the house down. But what I loved about her testimony is how fair she's been very hard on how they have allowed profits over people. But then she's also been very honest in the fact that these complications and problems are so nuanced. She actually used the word problems. Kira, Facebook has 2.8 billion users in over 130 countries. This isn't like the tobacco industry. This isn't the coal industry. This 8 billion users who are using it over time. Roger said something really interesting in the previous block, and I thought it was brilliant, where he talked about before he got with Facebook, Facebook wasn't a news feed, didn't have a news service. Well, look where it has grown now. That is the power of AI. That is the power of machine learning and big data. And when you said with this federal regulatory body that Francis is suggesting, which I am a big advocate of, needs to be focused on the AI, the artificial intelligence. But Kira, also too, I just did a random Google search right now during the hearing, and I typed in the word love. When I typed in the word love, you know what came up, Kira? No black images. I had to get all the way down to the bottom of the page to click more search for other images to populate, where I saw 2 partners that were black under the category of love. It's the same thing. Come up. The danger is with the AI system and the biases that are embedded in the AI system that the machine learning is learning off of because of the bad data sets that are being inputted, because there isn't diverse that then the machine can then learn from. It's no different, Kira, than what's happening right now in the judiciary system, where certain judges are using AI system to recommend those data sets that create this disparate biased outcomes of sentencing people and categories harsher than others. And so this becomes an AI narrative. Specify the importance of such a federal regulatory board. And even what's interesting, Kira, is how, there's been this narrative that Facebook needs to be broken up, the monopoly aspect of it. But even if Frances herself said that that's why her testimony is so credible.
Everybody here at this network has a lot of love for you, so don't feel like you're not getting any love. But this is a good segue when you talk about the biases and just this is something that stood out to you, and that is time and time again during the testimony, we kept hearing the description when talking about Facebook, morally bankrupt.
Very interesting allusion to personal financial bankruptcy, saying when an individual needs to file for that, the individual says, okay, I made a mistake, I got in over my head, and forward with his or her life. And she's saying essentially that is what Congress needs to do with Facebook. Pathetic towards Facebook, saying, look, they have a difficult job, but right now they are stuck, they are in over their heads, and it seems, and I'm paraphrasing here, as if Facebook built a machine it can't control. So her whole criticism of the company seems to be that it is more computer-centric versus human-centric. Now, of course, humans cost more money. That means bigger teams. That has other business implications. But she also referenced Facebook's revenue, which for the year 2020 is some resources to address these issues. And I think her call is for Congress to help Facebook save itself and then of Facebook. And that really stood out to me, Kira.
Such an incredibly important mission. Perfect way to button it up. Deidre Bolton, Mike Muse. It was powerful, it was explosive, and I know we all have our fingers crossed that change is yet to come. We'll be right back.
Ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You Do? Let's go. How are you?
ABC News Live.
What would you do?
Hey, I guess I just found out.
The What Would You Do Marathon.
What being live is all about. This is ABC News Live.
All right, we're going to move back. Let's move back.
We're surrounded by people
squeezing into this bomb shelter.
We're on an urgent delivery run.
Not afraid to go events.
This is the moment.
Streaming straight to you, anytime, anywhere.
You just met one friend right here.
You're watching ABC News Live. Thanks for streaming with us.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
seems to change just about every day.
But to make the most of it, feel smarter.
Feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
I do.
Has this been going, huh?
We have to be really careful.
Someone needs
to the American people. These allegations are false.
This is my real life we're talking about, and I'm scared.
Impeachment, American Crime Story. Tuesdays at 10, only on FX. Available now on demand.
Day. We have been following the hearing on Capitol Hill where senators questioned a former Facebook product manager turned whistleblower who says the company hides vital information from the public and repeatedly puts profits.
When we realized Big Tobacco was hiding the harms it caused, the government took action. When we figured out cars were safer with seatbelts, our government learned that opioids were taking lives. The government took action. I implore
steps the government could take to regulate social media giants like Facebook. President Biden is warning of dire consequences if the United States fails to raise the debt ceiling and goes into default, likening it to a meteor crashing into the economy. The soaring stock prices plunging, sending markets into free fall, military salaries would be frozen, Social Security benefits out on hold, and millions of jobs lost. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell saying his party will not help. Democrats are on their own. And there's a new twist in the space race. Russia has beat Hollywood to orbit. A Russian actress, director, and their professional Russian astronaut guide headed out of this world today on a rocket heading for the International Space feature film in space. Well, beaches are empty and habitats hang in the balance as crews are details also about when officials were made aware of that pipeline leak. Matt Gutman is on the scene in Huntington Beach with the latest for us.
How does that happen? As crews race to contain that California oil spill, new questions over when authorities first knew about the spill. According that thin layer of oil smearing the surface of the water came in at 8:22 p.m. on Friday. That report was followed up about 5 hours later by a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration satellite image showing its background with sharp edges, roughly this 8:55 the next morning, more than 12 hours later, that Amplify Energy reported a spill, saying it had shut its pipeline. Officials say
I wish that we were at least been alerted, just even the basic information. I definitely want a full investigation on what happened. And I want to hold all the individuals accountable for this spill.
officials now believe that pipeline, which runs just a few miles off the coast of Orange County, was likely ruptured.
Many are awaiting entry, and in the course of transit, it is possible that they would transit over a pipeline.
A flotilla of cleanup boats and teams of workers scooping up oil. On the water, we saw it firsthand.
So we're right around where that oil spill happened, and tar balls that are floating on the surface of the oil. And also, everywhere you look, you can see that sheen of oil on the surface.
Fish and wildlife experts rescuing birds from the sludge. It's believed to wildlife.
Here they are about to resume work behind me. And in order to expedite this and throw more funds at the cleanup, Governor Gavin Newsom of California declaring a state of emergency. Obviously, though, everybody is trying to examine that 12-hour time gap between what is apparently the first report of an oil when Amplify, the oil company, decided to shut down its pipelines, reporting to all the authorities that it seems to have had a leak. Now, that company has been hit with dozens of non-compliance violations over the decades in business, and this morning we are learning that the first federal lawsuit has already...
So much.